A binder sits on a steel table. Plain. White. 3 inches thick. The label on the spine, written in clean handwriting, reads, David. A man's hand, Detective Reyes, reaches across the table and opens it. He reads the first page, then the second, then the third. He stops. He looks up slowly across the table. Sitting across from him, Margaret Calloway. Black woman. Early 60s. Deep brown skin. Silver locks pinned back in a clean-up swept. Hands folded. Back straight. Wearing a structured charcoal wool coat over a black turtleneck like she dressed deliberately this morning, knowing exactly where she was going and why. She is watching him read her work. Reyes sets the binder down. Very carefully. Mrs. Calloway. She waits. How long have you had this? She holds his gaze without blinking. 6 years. The room goes completely silent. Why didn't you come to us sooner? She takes one breath. One. Then she answers. Because I needed to be certain. And because I needed him to come home first. Reyes stares at her and asks. Come home. Eli is on a flight right now. He lands in this city in 4 hours. He thinks I called him home because I'm sick. A pause that fills the whole room. I'm not sick. Margaret Calloway's kitchen. Morning. 7 years ago. She is standing at the kitchen table going through David's papers 3 weeks after his funeral. The way widows do. Not because they want to, but because the bills keep arriving and someone has to become the person who handles things. She is a retired forensic accountant. Nobody remembers this about her. She never talked about it. She kept a garden and made bread on Sundays and called her neighbors by their first names. She was the kind of woman who wore her profession quietly, the way some women wear their faith, present in everything she did, announced in nothing. She finds the insurance policy on a Tuesday. She reads it the way she reads everything. Carefully, completely, from the top of the first page to the bottom of the last. She is not skimming. She does not skim. She trained herself out of skimming 30 years ago in an audit room in Chicago when a single skimmed line cost a client $400,000 and nearly cost her her career. She reads every word. She reaches the secondary beneficiary clause. Eli James Calloway. She reads it again. Then she sets the document down on the kitchen table and she stands there for a long time, her hands flat on the table's surface, her eyes on the middle distance, running a calculation in her head that is both financial and something much worse than financial. She had not known about this clause. David had not mentioned it. And Eli had suggested the update. She picks the document up again. She checks the date it was updated. 6 months before David died. She checks the notary's stamp. She checks the signature. Everything is in order. Everything is legitimate. That is the problem. The legitimate thing is worse than the illegitimate thing, because the legitimate thing means someone planned. She puts the document in a plain white binder. She labels the spine with a single word. David. She puts it in the back of her wardrobe, behind her winter coats, and she goes downstairs and she makes tea. That was the beginning. But it was not the end. Because Margaret Calloway is not a woman who finds a thread and ignores it. She is a woman who follows it. Quietly. Without announcement. Without asking anyone for permission. For 6 years. The binder grew. Not quickly. Not recklessly. Slowly. The way a forensic accountant builds a case. One verified document at a time. Nothing added without a source. Nothing claimed without evidence. The first edition came 4 weeks after the funeral. Margaret was doing laundry. She was washing Eli's coat, the long dark one he had worn to the cemetery, the one she had taken in to clean because grief makes mothers do practical things when they cannot do the impossible thing. She checked the pockets the way she always checked pockets before putting clothes in the wash, because she had been doing laundry for other people for 40 years, and she had learned that pockets contain the truth about a person far more honestly than their face does. She found a receipt. A hardware store. 12 miles from the house. Dated 3 days before David died. Item, valve adjustment tool. Specialty grade. She knew what that tool was. She had been in enough industrial audits to know what it was used for and what it was not used for. She stood in the laundry room for a long time holding that receipt. Then she put it in a small plastic evidence bag. She had kept a supply of them from her working years, the kind of habit that never fully leaves a person, and she added it to the binder. The second edition came 8 months later. She had requested a copy of the old family phone plan records. She had been co-account holder on the plan for years, which gave her full legal access to the call history. She had told the carrier she needed them for an insurance filing. This was not entirely untrue. She went through the records line by line. She found the call, 6:15 p.m., the night David died. Eli to David. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Long enough to convince a man to stay home. She found the gap. David's outgoing calls beginning at 9 p.m., his friends, unanswered, escalating. He was trying to reach someone. He was already in trouble, and he did not know it. She found the silence. No call from Eli to David after 6:15 p.m. that night. No check-in. No arrival. No explanation of why he never came. He had simply called, canceled the only plan that might have saved David's life, and then made himself unreachable. She printed the relevant pages. She highlighted 3 rows in yellow. She added them to the binder. The 3rd edition came 2 years after the funeral. She had gone back to the basement. Not on impulse. She had been going back to the basement methodically, once every few months, with a flashlight and a magnifying glass, and the specific knowledge of a woman who had once spent 6 months auditing a manufacturing plant and had learned more about industrial valve systems than she had ever intended to know. She found the marks on the furnace valve on her 11th visit. Micro-abrasions around the housing. Tool marks. Deliberate, precise, made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how much adjustment was required to make the failure look like age and wear. She took 37 photographs. She printed them and annotated each one. She added them to the binder. The 4th edition was the one that took the longest. The burner phone call, 11:47 p.m., for seconds, the night David died. She had not been able to trace this herself. She had known about the call for 3 years before she could prove anything. She had found a reference to the number in an old text thread on David's phone, recovered from a backup she had been careful not to delete. A number David had texted once, asking who it belonged to, because it had appeared on the family bill and he did not recognize it. No reply. The number had gone silent. She had hired a private investigator. She paid him in cash. She told him only what he needed to know. 14 months later, he delivered a name. She added the name to the binder. She added the investigator's report. She added the evidence trail connecting the name to Eli. Years of association, a business arrangement that had never been formally registered, a shared address from 4 years ago. She held the completed binder in her hands. 47 pages. 6 years of work. She sat in her reading armchair in the warm lamplight of her living room, and she looked at it for a long time. Then she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Eli. She told him she had been having chest pains, that the doctor was worried, that she needed him to come home. He booked a flight within the hour. He would land in 4 days. The second call she made the following morning, to the police department. She asked for the detective assigned to cold case reviews. She was told his name was Reyes. She made an appointment. She put the binder in her bag. She did not do this because the law compelled her. She did not do this because grief finally broke her open. She did this because she had been a forensic accountant for 30 years. And the one thing a forensic accountant cannot tolerate, the one thing that keeps them awake at night more than any other, is an unreconciled account. David's death was an unreconciled account. She had been reconciling it for 6 years. Today she was filing the report. Detective Reyes had been on the force for 22 years. He had sat across from a lot of people in that time, suspects, witnesses, victims, and families of victims. He had developed, over those 22 years, a reasonably reliable instinct for reading the person in the chair across from him within the first 90 seconds of a conversation. Margaret Calloway had broken that instinct in the first 30. She had walked in, sat down, placed a 3-inch binder on the steel table with the calm precision of a woman submitting quarterly reports, and said, "My name is Margaret Calloway. I believe my son murdered my husband 6 years ago. Everything you need to build a case is in this document. My son lands at this airport in 4 hours." Reyes had been a detective for 22 years. He had not once had a witness open with that. He opened the binder. What he found inside was not the fragmented emotional testimony he usually received from families, the half-remembered details, the "I think it was a Thursdays," the "he always seemed off to me." What he found was a forensic case document. Sourced, dated, cross-referenced, annotated in the clean, precise handwriting of a woman who had spent a career building documents designed to survive scrutiny. The insurance policy, the hardware receipt, the phone records, 37 photographs of the furnace valve with annotations in red ink explaining exactly what the marks meant and how they were made. The private investigator's report, the name of the second person, the financial trail connecting them. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. Mrs. Calloway. Some of this evidence was obtained by a private investigator. Some of it you gathered yourself. None of it has chain of custody. I know, she said. That's why I came to you. What I have is a roadmap. What you have is the authority to make it admissible. He studied her. Why now? If you've had this for 6 years, why now? She looked at him steadily. Because for 4 of those years, I wasn't certain. The insurance policy was suspicious, but not proof. The receipt was circumstantial. The phone records were suggestive. I needed the furnace photographs. I needed the name behind the call. When I had both, I had enough. And the timing. Why did you call him home first? Here she paused. The first real pause in the conversation. She looked at the binder on the table between them, and then she looked back at Reyes, and her expression did something that her face, up to that point, had not done. It admitted something. Because I needed to see him, she said. Before you did. The room was very quiet. I needed to sit across from him in my kitchen and look at his face, and know that what I know is what I know. That I didn't build this out of grief. That I didn't build this out of anger. I needed to be sure I was right before I made it irreversible. Reyes was quiet for a moment. And if you'd looked at his face and doubted yourself? She held his gaze without flinching. I've been looking at his face for 34 years, detective. I don't doubt myself. Reyes closed the binder. He picked up his phone. He called his partner. He gave 3 instructions in under 30 seconds. Airport surveillance on an incoming flight. A warrant application expedited. A forensics team to an address on Carlisle Street for furnace examination. Then he put the phone down and looked at Margaret Calloway. You have 3 hours and 40 minutes before he lands. I know, she said. Where are you going to be when we bring him in? She stood. She picked up her bag. She buttoned her coat, the structured charcoal wool one, the one she had put on that morning knowing exactly what kind of day this was going to be. Home, she said. I'm going to make tea. She walked out of the police station at 9:17 a.m. Eli's flight was scheduled to land at 12:58 p.m. She had 3 hours and 41 minutes. She drove home. She put the kettle on. She sat in her reading armchair. And she waited. Here is something nobody tells you about being right. Being right is not a relief. Margaret Calloway sat in her reading armchair in the warm lamplight of her living room, and she waited. And she did not feel vindicated, and she did not feel peaceful, and she did not feel the clean resolution that 6 years of careful work might reasonably be expected to produce. She felt the weight of a mother who has just handed her son to the police. She felt it in her chest. She felt it behind her eyes. She felt it in her hands, which she had folded in her lap with the same controlled precision she had maintained in every difficult room she had ever sat in, but which were now, if you looked closely, if you were the kind of person who looked closely at hands, bearing the faintest, almost invisible tremor. Not guilt. She was clear about that. She was not guilty. She had done the right thing, and she had known she was doing the right thing, and she had built 47 pages of meticulous documentation precisely so that she could never be argued out of having done the right thing. But right and easy are not the same word. She thought about Eli at 7 years old, running to her in the hallway at night, when David's voice had filled the house and made the rooms feel smaller than they were. She thought about the specific weight of a small boy's arms around her neck and the specific smell of his hair and the specific quality of silence that fell over him once she was holding him, the way a storm passes. She thought about the man that small boy had become, the way he had been there every single day after David died, cooking her meals, driving her to appointments, sitting with her in the specific silence of shared grief. She had believed every moment of it. She had leaned on it. She had been grateful for it, in the way you are grateful for something that holds you up when you cannot hold yourself. She now understood that she had been leaning on a performance. He had watched her grieve the death he engineered. He had held her hand at the grave, year after year, at the grave of the man he had killed. He had absorbed her pain and offered her comfort, and not once, not for a single day across 6 years, had he told her the truth. This was not love. This was the most sophisticated kind of control she had ever witnessed. And she had spent 30 years auditing fraud. Her phone rang at 12:43 p.m. "Reyes, we have him." She said nothing. He was picked up at the gate before he cleared customs. He didn't resist. He asked for a lawyer. She said nothing. "Mrs. Calloway, are you there?" "Yes," she said. "Thank you." She hung up. She sat in the armchair. The tea she had made was cold. She looked at the mantelpiece across the room, the framed photographs, David young and laughing, Eli as a child. The two of them together before the years put distance between them, and the distance became something worse than distance. She looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up. She went to the kitchen. She poured the cold tea down the sink. She filled the kettle again. She put it on. She stood at the kitchen window while it boiled, and she looked at her garden, still bare from winter, the beds turned and waiting. The kind of garden that requires patience and the absolute faith that what you put into the ground in the cold will come back in the warmth. She had always been good at that kind of faith. 3 days after Eli Calloway was taken into custody at the airport gate, a warrant was executed on the Calloway basement. The forensic team spent 4 hours on the furnace. They found everything Margaret had photographed and annotated. They found additional marks she had missed, a second point of contact on the exchange unit, evidence of a more sophisticated modification than the initial examination had suggested. Their report concluded deliberate tampering, consistent with intent to cause fatal carbon monoxide accumulation over a period of 6 to 8 hours. The private investigator's lead on the second name held. The second person, a man who had known Eli for 11 years, who had shared an address with him briefly in 2019, who had a history of contract work that did not appear in any public registry, was brought in for questioning. He did not hold out long. He had not known David Calloway. He had not hated him, had no grievance against him. He had done what he had done for $30,000, half paid before and half paid after. And the specific 4-second call at 11:47 p.m. had been the signal for the second half. He confirmed Eli's involvement in full. Eli Calloway was charged with first-degree murder and criminal conspiracy. He entered no plea at his arraignment. His lawyer entered it for him. He did not look at the gallery when he was brought in. Margaret was not in the gallery. She was at David's grave. She had been there since 9 a.m. She had brought nothing, no flowers, no prepared words, no script. She had simply driven to the cemetery in the early morning gray and parked, and walked across the winter grass to the headstone that bore his name, and she had sat down on the bench in front of it. She sat there for a long time. The sky above the cemetery was the specific white of a day that cannot decide whether it is winter or spring, cold but not brutal, overcast but not dark. A threshold kind of day. She did not speak. She had spent 6 years speaking at this grave. 6 years of weekly visits. 6 years of telling him about her week. 6 years of apologizing for the arguments they never resolved. 6 years of being honest with a dead man in ways she had never fully managed while he was living. She did not speak today. Today she just sat. There is a particular silence that comes after a very long piece of work is finally finished. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion, the silence of a room after the last document has been filed and the last figure has been reconciled and the account that would not balance has finally, after years of patient, meticulous effort, balanced. Margaret Calloway sat in that silence. She had not done this for justice, exactly. She had done it because she was who she was. Because the woman she had been for 61 years could not look at an unreconciled account and walk away from it. Because the woman who had trained herself out of skimming 30 years ago in an audit room in Chicago could not look at the evidence of her husband's death and pretend she had not seen what she had seen. She had done it because David deserved the truth more than Eli deserved her silence. She had done it because her silence had a cost, and she had been paying that cost every day for 6 years, in the privacy of her own chest, in the dark of the bathroom floor, in the cold of 3 a.m. kitchens where she rehearsed words she was not yet ready to say. She had done it because she was finished paying. She looked at the headstone. David Arthur Calloway, beloved husband. She reached out and placed her hand on the top of the stone. Deep brown skin, strong hand, no gloves, direct contact with the cold surface. Not gripping, not performing, just resting. The way you rest a hand on the shoulder of someone you have finally told the whole truth to. The kettle in her kitchen at home would have been boiling by now. She would go home and make tea. She would sit in her garden for the first time this season. The beds turned and waiting. The tulip bulbs she had put down in October beginning, invisibly, underground, to move toward the surface. She would call no one. She would explain herself to no one. She had spent 6 years building a 47-page document so that she would never have to explain herself. The work spoke. She stood up. She buttoned her coat, the long midnight navy one, the one she had worn knowing today was an ending, and she turned and walked back across the winter grass toward the gate. She did not look back at the headstone. She had already said what she came to say. She had said it 6 years ago, quietly, in the back of her wardrobe, when she opened a plain white binder and wrote a single word on the spine. What would you have done? Not the easy version of that question. Not the version where you find out the truth all at once and have to make one clean decision in a living room with 2 detectives watching you. The real version. The version where you find the thread yourself. Where you pull it in the dark, alone, for 6 years, document by document. Because you were built by your training and your career and your 34 years of watching to be the kind of person who cannot leave an account unreconciled. The version where your hands know what your heart has not yet found the words for. Would you have built the binder? Would you have made the call? Would you have sat in that armchair and waited for them to take your son at the gate? Drop it in the comments. I want every answer. Because this story is real in the way that only the best true crime stories are real. Not because it happened exactly like this, but because the woman in it could be anyone who was ever built to see clearly and loved someone anyway. If this one hit different, the next one is waiting. Don't let it sit too long.